The church stood silent and shadowy as Victor fell to the ground, dead before the wedding ceremony had even begun. The witnesses stared in shock, and Victoria stood rigid, cold as marble, her tears not falling until much later. The priest tried to revive him, but his heart had stopped. In a moment that should have been filled with joy, everything collapsed into sorrow. The news spread quickly through the village, the narrow alleys filled with whispers and unease. Children no longer dared to play outside, and the elderly sat by their windows, muttering about warnings from spirits and treacherous fates. Victoria isolated herself in her home, while her family wept quietly, lost in their own shame. But Victor was not entirely gone. His soul, unable to find peace, wandered invisibly through the church and the quiet streets. The light from the windows cast long shadows across his face, and sometimes the villagers glimpsed a figure that did not quite belong to the world of the living. When the wind rustled through the tree branches, his whispers could be heard, as if someone were calling to those left behind. Emily, the corpse bride, sensed his presence immediately. She had carried her own sorrow for centuries, but now she met another soul who truly belonged nowhere. She reached out a hand to him in the night's mist, beyond the church walls, in a forest where moonlight filtered through bare branches. Victor took her hand, and for the first time in a long while, he no longer felt alone. They drifted together between the worlds, free from the rules of the living, yet bound by their shared grief. Victoria visited the church every day. She placed flowers at the altar where Victor had fallen, spoke to him in quiet moments, and sometimes felt a cool hand on her shoulder or a cold breeze that made the candles flicker. Slowly, she came to understand that love does not always require presence. Some bonds survive even death. Her sorrow gradually transformed into strength, and she began to care for the village and its people, spreading warmth where fear had once ruled. The village changed too. People started talking about the strange apparitions that wandered at night, about lights dancing in Victor's old room and whispers in the wind. They were afraid, but also curious. Victor and Emily moved through the shadows, sometimes playfully, sometimes sorrowfully. They visited the village as fleeting figures, a sudden light in a window, a cold wind that made the trees rustle in time with a melody no living person could hear. One night, when the moon hung high and silver pale over the church, Victor stepped out alone onto the church roof, gazing down at the town and feeling the heavy freedom of his new existence. Emily drifted close beside him, their hands intertwined, and together they began to dance across the rooftops, their shadows twisting over the tiles. Their laughter was not of this world, and their sorrow was deep, but their freedom was greater than any pain. Victoria, still on the ground, smiled sadly as the wind whispered his name. She had learned that love does not always mean physical presence. Sometimes it means remembering, feeling, and continuing to live with a heart full of light despite the darkness. And somewhere in the night's mist, among shadows and starlight, Victor and Emily danced on, eternally bound to each other, yet always beyond the world of the living. The village was never the same again. The church remained a place where faint whispers could be heard, where lights danced in the windows even though no one lived there, and where the inhabitants learned that respect and reverence for the dead were just as important as love and friendship among the living. And in the deep darkness of the night, when the wind rustled through trees and towers, one could sometimes see Victor and Emily dancing under the moon's cold glow, an eternal reminder of love, sorrow, and what lies beyond death.